Okay, welcome to the show. This is Internet Uncapped. I am your host, Evan. Mitchell could not join us today, but in his place, we have a special guest. His name is Harris Dang, who is a Rotten Tomatoes approved film reviewer from Down Under in Australia. And so I would like to welcome you today to the show to talk about the Odyssey. Harris, thank you for joining me today.
I'm very happy to be here, Evan. I'm very happy to be here.
Indeed. So we're going to do a couple of new things on the show. I'm going to just get this up right now. Before we talk about the Odyssey, I think it only makes sense that we, uh, as it will, defy the gods. And so we're going to do that right now. So I'll begin. We're talking about the Odyssey. This is the big Christopher Nolan epic that has been in the works since the Oscar-winning, Best Picture-winning Oppenheimer. This has been long awaited for a very long time. This was going to be like his big, giant, next big thing movie. And definitely box office and all of that have proven to be a major smash hit success on all fronts. To begin my thoughts on the Odyssey, it's very interesting because I actually have a lot more mixed thoughts about this than I expected because on every conceivable level you could possibly imagine, right? Um, the production design, flawless. Cinematography, fantastic. Acting was, I thought, incredibly spot on for the material that you were going through for this big giant Greek epic, one of the oldest written stories in recorded history. And so to adapt it sort of for a modern audience is definitely an unparalleled feat unto itself. Everything I thought was down to the wire, just like excellently executed. My thing about this movie, though, Harris, was that the script was a bit of, I wouldn't say a letdown. I just felt like it wasn't nearly as strong as it could have been. And I felt a little bit like distant from it. It was kind of like, I just felt like I didn't emotionally connect to the material in the way I felt that this really ginormous, big, sweeping epic could have. And I'm sure we'll get into it a little more specifically once we start really talking about it. But those are really my initial thoughts. It's like, on the one hand, everything flawless. On the one hand, and on the other hand, it's like, nah, it just left a lot to be desired. I just felt like there were certain things that I just didn't connect with or didn't click with on an emotional level, and it's kind of like if it just did a few things differently in the script, or maybe had some people doing certain things or saying certain things just a little differently. I don't know. Maybe it would have gone over the hill for me, but it was still a really good time. I had to really process a lot of it, and in the end, I thought it was overall pretty well done and very well executed, even if it wasn't like the best movie of the year, number one for me personally. But anyway, yeah. So Harris, if you want to elaborate on your thoughts on the Odyssey, what did you think of the movie?
Well, first of all, I saw it early in IMAX, and I my expectations. Well, the thing about Christopher Nolan is that he's a filmmaker that I started to appreciate first before I grew to really like his work. If that makes
Mm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, I like the um, Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises because those are comic books essentially,
Mm-hmm.
but eh, over time, like, I appreciate more the technicalities of his work, but I didn't really dive into the emotional through line of his work, mainly because I probably didn't have enough life experience at the time, or
Sure.
I just didn't know much about filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah.
But over time, I grew to really appreciate both the emotional grounding as well as the technical qualities of his work. So, in the case of the Odyssey, because this tale was like really old, like, basically 3 millennia, and it's been adapted so many times, and it was intriguing of Christopher Nolan to adapt this source material alone, and knowing that Nolan doesn't really dive into the whole fantasy element particularly with his earlier work. It
Hmm.
was interesting to see what he was trying to do here, but, having seen the film, like, you're absolutely right, it is, like, technically flawless. Um, I can understand why people would be a bit disappointed when the movie doesn't dive into the whole magic fantasy as much as it should,
Right.
but especially when the movie starts off with in an apparent in a time of apparent magic. I think that's what the movie starts off with.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, that's right.
yeah,
Yes.
mm, and, I thought the because of the Odyssey, everyone knows what it's about. I like the fact that Christopher Nolan made the whole story about, um, kind of it's almost like a redemptive arc because of the, Odysseus defying Zeus's law and wanting to, outsmart someone to the point where he made the whole Trojan horse idea. I
Yes.
do like the fact that, Odysseus is even though he's treated as a person of, utmost intelligence, I do like the fact that it is still a war movie, and a war movie has, like, just drastic consequences, and I do like how Nolan makes a whole arc out of it,
Hmm.
particularly when you realize what the inclusion of Zendaya's character is in the
Yes.
film
Right.
when we further realize it down the line.
Hmm.
So, those emotional through lines really got to me when I watched the movie,
Yeah.
and it's for that alone that I really can't wait to watch the movie again because sometimes when you watch a movie like this, the epic scope is just so overwhelming that you're just basically just enjoying the presentation as
Sure.
opposed to the narrative of it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I was wondering to ask you, like, do you think that your expectations of the movie and what it actually is, do you think that maybe if you watch it a second time, it will improve on second viewing?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely required of me to watch it a second time. I think certainly I also saw it in like in big IMAX theater. I was like pretty close to the front row. It was a really good view despite it being in the very front row. But like, yeah, I think I was really like kind of taking it all in. And I'm when I see movies, I definitely acknowledge that like I am probably gonna see this another time. I'm probably gonna see, if I like it, because of course if I don't like it, if it fucking sucks, I'm not gonna see it again. Like that's not gonna happen, right? But for a movie I like, and this is a movie that I thought was good, right? But I definitely think that if I were to pick up on more things, if I were to understand it a second time with a more clear sort of way that the direction is going, it's very possible that I might like it more. But I think maybe some of the things that I initially had issues with might still be there, just because I can pinpoint what they are. But maybe in the second viewing, it could be that, oh, okay, I might not have an issue with it this time around as compared to when I first saw it. So it's very
Mm,
possible, but that's to be determined at this point in time. Yeah.
absolutely. And I want to ask you another question. What was before the movie came out? Essentially, there was like modern touches on the story that people had issue with, whether it was the
Yes.
casting
Yes.
or the dialogue. And I just wanted to know what your opinion is about it.
Yeah, actually, yes, I was actually going to get into that a little bit, but no, thank you for asking that question. My opinion is that a lot of people have were it's so overreactive and dramatic. It's really over the top that people are complaining that Elliot Page is in the movie because he's a trans man, or that, oh, Helena of Troy is white, and why did they cast a black woman for Helena of Troy? And it's like, okay, but like if you really read, if like, see, I didn't know this before going in, but after learning about it, what I understand is that in the initial story of the Odyssey, when they get to the part with Helen of Troy, there is no clear description of what she looks like. The point is that she is a mysterious figure of desire, and that you put your sort of bias of beauty onto her. So, like, it's going to be anybody that you can think of. It's that, historically, because Romans and Greeks and all those kinds of figures were portrayed by white people historically, of course you're going to get a white woman as Helen of Troy. And it's interesting because this version of the Odyssey has a very diverse cast. Black people, Asians, people like that. And I think that Christopher Nolan was kind of challenging the notion of like what a Greek army would realistically look like, especially because, like, from my understanding, there were actually like soldiers from other armies who came to these other countries and fought for those countries, not in the same way that, modern immigration and modern integration of these people were, but it's like that
Mm,
was like always a thing. And it's
mm,
just that over time, the representation of that was never in play for a very long time. And then with multiculturalism and with this and that, it just kind of like changed the rules a lot. So yeah, I mean, when I look at this movie and when I criticize this movie for what I criticize, all that bullshit is completely separate. Out the door. Don't miss me with that bullshit, right? You know what I mean? Like it's all so silly and irrelevant. And in fact, let me say this as well. Elliot Page legitimately was my favorite part of the movie. His character and his character arc in particular, I found incredibly compelling, especially when you look at it between what Odysseus was trying to do with the Trojan War and basically his sacrifice. And
mm,
there were a lot of hard hitting emotions that Elliot was expressing, and he sold it. He absolutely sold everything that was going on. And yeah, I to and like could you think of anybody else that could pull off that role in that way, expressing those emotions? I personally, I don't think you could. And like, he's trans, okay, so what? He's an actor. He's an actor. Like, if and so, there's that whole thing where he was a young boy in the very early part of the movie, and now he's grown up and he's a man. So he's an actor, though. He's playing a
mm,
part. Like, so what if
mm,
he's trans? So what if the kid, the boy, was born a boy originally? Like, it's a movie. This is fiction. Like,
mm.
expand your horizons. Who gives a shit about the trans part? That's my opinion. But it's just, again, all the culture war bullshit. It's like, that's not critical analysis. That's not film reviewing, really. It's just schlock and bullshit.
So I can bullshit. That's a good term to put it.
It is.
Hmm. Uh, that reminds me. Yeah, Elliot Page. Yeah, he was amazing in the scene. Like, especially like in the very first scene you see him in. I thought, oh wow, is I thought his role was gonna be small. And of course, I totally forgot that, this is Christopher Nolan here, so we're clearly going through a story where it cuts back and forth. It's clearly not gonna be chronological.
That's
And
true. Right.
tech technically, there's, like, 3 timelines. There's, like, the past, the present, and what's gonna happen.
Yes. Right.
And because of that, that's gonna be another reason why I wanted to watch it again because,
Hmm.
that's how Nolan tells his stories. And, with editor Jennifer Lane, who's worked with him ever since Tenet. I think it was Tenet. And yeah,
Hmm.
like, there must have been, like, a lot of footage and story to put all together to
Oh my god.
make it the film as it is. Mm.
No, it's true. I mean, like I said, I give everybody credit. The editing in particular, it's like, how in the world could you make something like that and make it so seamless? I mean, because of its length, definitely there were times where I felt like, it's like, okay, let's move it along, let's try to. But that's not. It's not a fault of anyone in the production. It's more so just the absolute enormity of the story itself and what it needs to get done. So even if it lagged a bit, it's not that it lagged because it was bad. It lagged because of how big this whole story was. You know. And I also like that too. You mentioned a very good point about the different timelines and everything like that. It reminded me a lot at parts of Memento, and even just like the way he puts things out of chronological order in other movies definitely Oppenheimer was like that too, especially with the cuts between black and white and color, and that was like the past and the present and all of that stuff. So definitely, there's no question this is a Christopher Nolan movie, and all the Christopher Nolan tropes are in there. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's like, you know, with even with the very strong performances, I would have preferred if he brought on a co-writer for this script and then
mm,
really just draw out those emotions, draw out the juicy parts or the parts that we really want to like sink our teeth into, and that'll complement all the technical stuff. I mean, even like with Cersei, for instance, that scene was very evocative and creepy, and just the way that they use both the realistic cinematography as well as the special effects, I was like really like, holy whoa. It just was like, it was like I just would never have thought to do that. And there was nothing particularly wrong with that scene. In fact, I would say that's also one of the best scenes because it drew in the emotion. You could kind of see that she was this broken person. She was in kind of this weird predicament with her sister that was turned into a crow, and she doesn't quite know how to deal with life and deal with her mental instability and all of that. And scenes like that, it's like those are the kinds of scenes that worked for me. And then there are certain other scenes that aren't as emotionally juicy, that just feel like it's like we're going from one point to the next point to the next to the next to the next. And I've just seen Nolan, like particularly with Batman or the Dark Knight in particular. That one was a very perfect mixture of the stakes and the plot. And the stakes is the emotional part, and the plot is the stuff that's all the technical stuff. Like that, like Dark Knight was the perfect marriage of these two things. And then when you have the Odyssey, I feel like you're doing an undertaking that's so big that you probably need a little bit of extra, like just a little bit of that extra oomph, maybe just one more person or a few other things. It's still massively impressive. It still is. And but it's just like, there's just these tiny little things that just for me personally I just felt were missing. And but who knows, I may, if I were to rewatch it again, I would be very curious myself to see what I end up thinking of it.
uh, that does make me think of something. Like, I really liked how the third act of the Odyssey is essentially like the third act of Dark Knight Rises, like
Hmm.
the culmination of everything that just came before. And as soon as Odysseus just arrives back to the island, where he basically just cleans up house. I thought, okay, everything's all come together. The angle with the dog, the angle with Sinan, and all the return of him when not everyone knows that it's him, and maybe the realization from what's his name, Telemachus.
Telemachus,
Really,
yep.
yeah,
Hmm.
like after like 20 years, like, oh, his father, he may actually, the beggar may actually be his father, even though
Yes.
Odysseus is posing as Sinon. I think he's posing as Sinon. But yeah, like all of that coming together had me like so emotionally invested. Like it's happened the same thing with Dark Knight Rises. Like I was so emotionally invested, like all the music, all the
Hmm.
conflicts all coming together to the
Yes.
point where
Yep.
like this is a fault in Christopher Nolan movies where the hand to hand combat scenes aren't the best. Like I was
Yeah.
so emotionally invested to the point where that didn't bother me. I bet you if I watch it again, I'll realize that, oh, maybe it's not as rousing as I remembered.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
I think it's because the whole movie shot on IMAX cameras, there's not much logistical movement you can do with a close up hand to hand combat action scene.
That's
Because
true.
IMAX, I'm pretty sure, is done with like wide angles, hence the massive scale. But
Right. Yeah, actually,
but
because he did the whole thing in IMAX, and there are these
mm,
limitations. That is actually very true.
mm.
That is definitely very true. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, but I was really just full on invested at the very end, and seeing the villains just act up in their world of cowardice, particularly
Yeah.
Antinius. Just
Yeah. No, I thought that was it was interesting that part because like Robert Pattinson was such a bastard in that movie. It was just like he just didn't give a fuck about anything or anyone. About John Leguizamo, the blind guy, about Themicles, about like literally anything, and it's like you're supposed to be a leader of this entire army, and yet you act like such a coward, such a bully in a way. It's like you're not, there's nothing noble about you. There's nothing honorable about you. But they also ask that same question about Odysseus as well, and it's like because of the journey that he goes through and how much of a kind of chameleon shapeshifter he goes throughout his entire story arc. He goes through multiple different roles and multiple different transitions. So it's like it is to ask the question about not so much that if Odysseus is a good guy or a bad guy, but it's kind of like what is the role of a leader of an army? Like what is the
Mm,
role of someone with such immense power and such great command in sort of his people? And I thought that was very well done. And I also like that, I wouldn't say he was the most humble person because there were mistakes along the way. He made a ton of very interesting
mm,
mistakes, but he definitely had a head on his shoulders. He was very determined to do what he felt he had to do, and he was able to problem solve and work his way through stuff in a way that it wasn't like obvious how he was able to figure it out, but in a weird
mm,
way, it was compelling because of how imperfect he was, if that makes sense. He looked perfect, but everything around him, when you really think about it, was so imperfect and so like, wow, like he really fucked up, even with as this sort of like, I don't know if you call it larger than life, but it's like the movie portrays him as larger than life, even as the end says, oh no, he's just a mortal, he's just a man, he's not this big, larger than life figure like a god or anything. And I think Matt Damon just sells that aspect perfectly. Even
mm.
like in The Martian, he's this guy who literally is trapped on Mars, and he has to grow he has to grow potatoes with his own shit. Like he sells that so well, and he sells it with a lot of humor, a lot of just a lot of realism and groundedness, and he gives that sort of sensibility to Odysseus. And in that respect, like I definitely think that he elevated the material that he was given, and everybody really did. I thought everybody really elevated the material that they received, but particularly Matt Damon, who I thought did a really great job. So before we wrap it up, I do have one question because I've been very curious about this particular thing. So in the movie, there were a ton of very famous actors, like a ton, and it's kind of crazy how many actors he crammed into this thing and gave pretty decent amounts of screen time. But
Mm.
the one person I wanted to talk about was Anne Hathaway as Penelope. Anne Hathaway has a very peculiar reputation for the kinds of like roles and also the kinds of performances that she's been given. I so in particular, and obviously this is a spoiler review, so it doesn't matter that we're talking about this, but she is sort of stuck in this predicament about how she can't ascend to the throne because Odysseus is not back, and yet Themicles is like right there, and if
Mm.
she wanted to, she could just be like, okay, I'll give it to you, whatever. But she's so obsessed with this idea about Odysseus coming back, Odysseus coming back. And she gets to a point where she's very frustrated, literally at her own son, and she just lashes out at him, just like insane. And then she just leaves. And I'm like, girl, that is your son. What are you doing? But I wanted to know a couple of different things, but I'll start here. What did you think of Anne Hathaway as Penelope?
Well, I thought she gave a great performance.
Hmm.
I understand the frustrations as to why she lashed out like that, mainly because
Mm,
she she can't get any recognition or anything out of the fact that she is ruling the the area. but the island.
Hmm.
But there's
Yeah,
but no one can see that because it's just an empty throne to everyone else, and
that's true. Yeah,
that that alone is like that would be very frustrating. And having having a bunch of suitors out there just waiting to just jump at you as well for 20 years, mind you, and it is a lot to take in. And I do like the fact that the film takes in or recognizes that and applies that to the characterization of Penelope. And I think Anne Hathaway pulls that off very well.
mm.
She's been having a very good year. She's got 5 films this year,
Yeah.
and
Jeez.
I
Yeah,
this and this most likely will be her best role of this year. But like,
yeah.
yeah, I think she sells the the romantic angle between her and Odysseus early on in the film,
Hmm.
and I think she sells the emotional turmoil of not only longing for Odysseus, but also just carrying that weight of the 2 decades rule of the um 2 decade rule of the island, as well as having to carry the fact that her son Telemachus, even though technically he would be the one ruling the island according to Zeus's law and so on, she, she has to grapple with the fact that that Zeus's law is there, but it's her son as well,
Right.
and the love of her son, and having his son to carry all that while she's been carrying all that as well is there's a lot of dramatic weight to that as well, and I really appreciate how Anne Hathaway was able to portray that.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I agree actually with much of that. What this is sort of how I see her in terms of like what I saw. She operated a lot of times in like two different modes. If you it's okay, so this is her, and she's going through life, and she's just really just kind of like trying to keep things steady, keeping things in control, not quite within her control, but she's very like sort of downplaying her just feelings and whatever.
Mm,
Then all of a sudden she'll have this crazy spike up of just like ah! It's just like, and she's just like I can't do this anymore, and like it's like a second or like 2 seconds or like whatever, and like it was so there were times where I felt like she was operating on two different modes and she didn't combine the two modes into like how that would be portrayed emotionally as a character arc. It wasn't
mm,
bad in terms of the material. If that was the material that she was given, then she was able to interpret it in her own way. But I think that in order for her to get to a place where you understand fully her predicament, she has to do more, not just play it very flat. She has to also kind of like play it flat, but maybe there's something in her body language. Maybe there's something in her decision making, and not just like completely just going just completely just going all out, just bursts of energy. But who knows? Like, there are people who do that. They literally just like out of frustration, they just completely just crash out, and then you never see that again. So it's I had a hard time grappling with that a little bit. Here's what I'll say though. So Charlize Theron, she plays a woman who actually ends up rescuing Odysseus, named Calypso. And
mm,
Calypso is like a whole thing in Greek mythology and whatever. And so it was suggested that basically like he lost his entire like memories, and he's kind of like rebuilding himself, and he had to be on the island that Calypso was on for like 6 years, and he never even knew it was 6 years at that point.
mm,
She was great as Calypso, really great as Calypso. I thought I actually liked. But what was interesting about Calypso is that her role actually was fairly emotional in a way because she cared about Odysseus.
mm,
She was trying to nurture him back to a form of normalcy, to his full strength, so that he can go back and then he can try to confront the army where Penelope and Themistocles and everybody was. But I thought about this, and I acknowledge what I saw on screen with both Penelope and Calypso. But if you actually switched the roles and you had Charlize Theron as Penelope and Anne
mm,
Hathaway as Calypso, in my mind at least, I actually think Charlize Theron could pull off Penelope quite excellently because she makes very complex decisions in much of her acting, in so many different things. Monster
Mhm.
was definitely a very compelling, very complicated role that she had to navigate. Obviously, Mad Max and all of that. She's had so many iconic roles, but in a weird way, Charlize Theron has sort of a she could pull off a strength but also a vulnerability that Penelope required for this role. And then with Anne Hathaway, like Anne Hathaway very clearly wanted to be emotional. Like she can pull off emotional kinds of roles. And not that Calypso was a super emotional role, but there was definitely something that Anne Hathaway could have done that a Charlize Theron maybe. There were a few different things here and there. Again, not that she didn't completely sell it for me, but that I don't know, it would have looked different. So in any case, I just thought that was I agree with what you said. I think Anne Hathaway did what Anne Hathaway did for Penelope, but I also had that kind of like, what if the roles were reversed and what that would have looked like, kind of hypothetical scenario.
Never thought of it that way, actually.
Yeah.
That's, it does give me a lot of things to think about, but yeah, Charlize Theron in the role of Penelope, like there would be a strong resolve behind that. Uh, there, I, I'm not sure about. Oh, I'm pretty sure Anne Hathaway can pull off the bit of the allure of Calypso,
Yeah.
but yeah, it does give me a lot to think about, though.
Yeah, no, even I'm like, yeah, no, it's like, what does that look like? Like, how does that operate? But it's possible. Anything's possible. It's kind of
Hmm.
like one of those hypothetical questions. And I should definitely do a show on this at some point. But like, for example, with the movie, what's it? Oh God, I'm blanking on it. Carlito's Way. So Carlito's Way, that was Al Pacino, Brian De Palma, right?
Hmm.
Now, Al Pacino played a Puerto Rican gangster guy, and he is not Puerto Rican. He is Italian, like full blooded,
Hmm.
like Italian. And I was thinking to myself, like, okay, like this is a great movie. Everything moves, everything shakes out great. Al Pacino, of course, is being Al Pacino. But there was definitely something missing with that particular performance, and I could not think of off the top of my head exactly. And I realized something. Well, there's not a lot of representation for Puerto Rican actors necessarily in media, and certainly not in the 80s or even the 90s. But who could possibly pull that off? Like who could be someone that like could pull off the complexities of that particular role? And I am going to pull this up right now, if I can find a very good photo of this gentleman. So just give me one. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to show you who I think it should have been.
Ooh.
Okay, hold on. Perfect. The role I think would have been Raul Julia as Carlito. Raul Julia, for those who don't know, he is a very famous Puerto Rican actor. He has been in a lot of movies. The one that maybe most people would know him from is Gomez Adams in the Adams Family movies, but he was also in Kiss of the Spider Woman. And I think that because he is Puerto Rican and because he is such a dramatic actor, I actually think he would have given a very interesting dimension that otherwise you would not see in a Al Pacino performance. So it's kind of, I
Hmm.
just think about that kind of stuff about like what if like the roles were reversed and some other actor would have played that role, and that is one of those. We'll never know what that looks like, but anything goes. Anything's very possible. But Raul Julia, shout out to you, and rest in peace. He was a wonderful, wonderful actor. So, but
And the wonderful
anyway,
M. Bison.
yeah. So, but anyway, I think that just about wraps it up. And now we have to put the gods to rest. We are now going to rate the Odyssey right now, and I'm going to pull up our list right here that we do. So, just as a reminder for the audience, we do have our rating system. We go from the worst of the worst, which is what we call a real Anissa move. Anissa, of course, is the wife of YouTuber iDubbbz, and she's a whole thing and a whole piece of work. And She's just horrible, and so we call that a real Anissa move, the worst of the worst, from half star to a full star. We also have a DSP stream. What you see is what you get. It's pretty shit, dog shit, and terrible. A mid, solid, really good, and of course the top rating being excellent. And so for the Odyssey, right here on the bottom right, I would give this a solid. I really liked what I really liked. I appreciate it on a technical level, but there were just parts of the script that I just did not think worked all that well. But hopefully, if I were to revisit it again, and when I revisit it, because I know I'm going to revisit it at some point, maybe it'll work a little more in my favor. But as of now, it was a good time, but left a lot to be desired. Harris, what would you give the Odyssey out of 5 stars, or for the rating system?
Yep. So I will give it an excellent. I'll give it a 5 stars. I thought it was a sweeping epic. I didn't think I would ever see a film of such grand scale of this time, considering the digital age of everything's done in CGI or such, technological advances. It was just amazing to see such grand scale sudden done in such a practical way. And I
Yeah.
think, although this may not be the best Christopher Nolan movie, it's certainly the most Christopher Nolan movie.
Now that I can definitely agree with. That there is no doubt that this is the most Christopher Nolan of all time. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think that'll do it for the show. Harris, thanks once again for joining us. This was a really great conversation.
I'm that's very happy to be here, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it for sure. So, anyway, in the meantime, that is our show. Be sure to hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought of the Odyssey. And until next time, we will see you in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.